Breaking news on prostate cancer, the most common cancer in men globally, with 1.4 million new cases in 2022. Well, NHS advisors here in the UK have officially announced that they've decided against routine prostate cancer screening. The National Screening Committee has ruled out mass testing for all men over 50. It's thought to be worried about the potential harm from mass testing outweighing the number of lives saved. The committee has also decided against even a specific screening programme for black men who are at a greater risk of the disease, and against screening for men with a history of prostate cancer in their families. The only group who will be offered screening will be men with specific genetic mutations that can cause aggressive tumours. Well, let's go straight to our health reporter, Jim Reid. He's there in the newsroom for us. And Jim, so they've rejected this. Are you getting word in terms of their reasoning?
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, this is such a huge deal for, tens of thousands, if not more, men in this country every year. So if you look at the statistics on prostate cancer, 55,000 men in the UK alone diagnosed every year, and roughly 12,000 die. But as you said in the introduction, whereas we have kind of national screening campaigns, systems for other forms of cancer, lung cancer, for example, breast cancer, we do not have one for prostate cancer. And that's been the big debate at the moment, whether men should receive a letter in the post on a regular basis every year, every couple of years, asking them to come forward to their GP for tests for this disease. Well, it's a very complex argument. We've had this panel of scientists that have looked at the arguments, both sides of the arguments, for a good few months, couple of years on this, and have come to their big decision today. And I should say there has been a big campaign from charities representing families, people involved, people who have lived through this disease, and some very high-profile figures. David Cameron, the former Prime Minister of the UK, Rishi Sunak, Sir Chris Hoy, the Olympic gold medal cyclist, have all campaigned for more testing. But today, the decision, as you said, has been made not to set up this national testing campaign, at least for all men. Instead, there will be a limited number, roughly 20,000 men with a certain genetic mutation that will be asked to come forward on a regular basis for these tests. And the arguments against a national testing regime are that it could do, according to this report, more harm than good. And that's because prostate cancer is a very strange disease. For some people, it can be very aggressive. For others, you might not even notice you have prostate cancer. You can live with it for many, many years, maybe into your 90s, even later, and then die of a completely different cause. And the argument is that some people might, therefore, if they're diagnosed with prostate cancer, go through very aggressive treatments, diagnosis, biopsies, perhaps end up in a situation where some of those side effects, for example, things like incontinence, sexual dysfunction, could have more of an impact on their life, cause more harm than the cancer itself. And that's why, at the moment at least, this decision has been made not to put in place this national screening for all men in the UK.
Jim Reid, thanks very much. We'll be back to you a little later on in the programme. Jim mentioning just some of the high-profile names that have campaigned. We had David Cameron, we had Rishi Sunak, and he was mentioning there Sir Chris Hoy. He has just released a statement. Let me just read it to you. I am extremely disappointed and saddened by the recommendation announced by the National Screening Committee today to rule out against a national screening for men at high risk of prostate cancer. And he goes on to say, I know firsthand that by sharing my story following my own diagnosis 2 years ago, many, many lives have been saved. Early screening and diagnosis saves lives. So that is what has just come from Sir Chris Hoy. Let's continue with this, because here in the studio with me is Paul Lyth, who was diagnosed himself with prostate cancer. We're also joined by Laura Kirby, who's CEO of the charity Prostate Cancer UK. Thank you, both of you, for being here with us. So we've had official word. Laura, to you first of all, your immediate reaction.
So Prostate Cancer UK are deeply disappointed with the fact that the evidence isn't there to tip screening. The benefits are still being outweighed by the harm. So we're deeply disappointed. And this will be a blow to thousands of men. And our heart goes out, as you'll hear from Paul, to those men that are going to be affected by this.
Paul, tell me more about your story. When were you first diagnosed?
Well, I was diagnosed by chance back in October 21. I went to the doctor for something completely unrelated. I had no thoughts of prostate cancer. I had no symptoms or anything. But we did a blood test, and the doctor happened to ask for a PSA test as part of that overall package. And within 2 days, I was asked to go to have further investigations, because my reading was 56, and anything over 4, I believe, is considered dangerous, so 56 was pretty high. And having not been ill for 15 years, all of a sudden, that was it, and I had no inkling at all.
Yes, and you said there in that answer you had no symptoms. You said to our producer, when they told you, it came like a bombshell.
Absolutely, yeah. I had no idea. I thought it was the end of my life. I hadn't read anything about it. I had no idea what the prostate did. Obviously, we've learned a lot of things since then. But I had lots of treatment. I had radiotherapy treatment, and I've been off. I had to have hormones for 3 years. So the testosterone is what feeds the cancer, or that's the thought process. I was diagnosed with locally advanced. If it had been left any longer, then who knows what could have happened. So just by chance, it was caught, and I was able to be treated successfully, thankfully.
Laura, in terms of the reasoning for not supporting screening black men, now it's reported that one of the reasons is that there was insufficient evidence they get a more severe disease. What did you make of that, given that we know that for black men, they are twice as likely to actually get prostate cancer?
Yeah, so 1 in 4 black men will get prostate cancer in their lifetime, and the evidence is not conclusive. There's not enough data at the moment. And so what we're doing at Prostate Cancer UK is we've actually launched this large trial called Transform. And Transform will be focusing now on the evidence gaps that we see in the report once we get the full report through.
But what's the gap, given that we know that they are twice as likely to
So
get
the
it?
gap is the evidence is just not there. We can't prove the data. There hasn't been enough data collected from black men to be able to prove that they wouldn't be put at more harm than benefit. So we need to get that data. We will do that through Transform, because 10% of Transform will be recruited from black men. And we're also putting together real world evidence. So what that means is we're putting £1 million into collecting evidence now about what is happening to black men, so that we can go back to the National Screening Committee and make a case at a later date.
Give me just a brief thought on what Jim was saying. One of the reasons about harms outweighing the benefits, because you said right at the beginning how disappointed you were, because we've always known it's a sort of grapple and a trade-off between those two things. In terms of where this committee has landed, your thoughts on that?
So the National Screening Committee are the experts, and so we respect the process that they've run and the draft recommendation that they've made. Prostate Cancer UK thought that as the way we diagnose prostate cancer had changed so much with the MRI scan, that might have shifted the balance so that the benefit was greater than the harms. But the evidence shows quite clearly that the benefit, so men found with aggressive cancers that can be treated and cured, does not outweigh the harms of overtreatment. So that's men with slow-growing cancers that will cause them no serious risk, having unnecessary tests and unnecessary treatment.
Paul, let's turn to that issue that Jim also talked about, which was that they've also said no for cancers or screening for cancers where it's known to be within the family. Now, of course, you have a son. Tell me that story, because as well as your own diagnosis, there was more information that very quickly led on. So take me through that.
Absolutely. Well, I have 4 sons. So following my diagnosis, it was recommended that any of them over 40 get tested. And my eldest son, who was 43 at the time, was sadly diagnosed with prostate cancer as well. And he had no idea either. And he was told that he could, if it hadn't been found straight away, he could have been dead within 5 years. And he'd still only be 48. Yeah. So it's crazy.
And of course, that directly corresponds to exactly the issues we are talking about. There are the pictures there on the screen. So when you heard about the officials saying no to any sort of family links and screening, what is your gut reaction to that?
I'm really sad and absolutely disappointed. One of the things that I've done for the last 4 years since diagnosis is campaign avidly. I play football, I've talked to lots of footballers and all to try and get them tested. In fact, last night I spoke to somebody who said, I've asked my doctor for a test, and he said, what do you want that for? Have you got any symptoms? Well, no, we're just trying to preempt things. We find it by chance. What else can you do?
Laura, a couple of final thoughts, if I can pull them all together. What does national screening cost? So give me that sort of an idea. Is it a factor, do you think? And this basic decision, because we know, of course, there's a physical test you can have, a blood test, but there are gaps, aren't there? So does today's decision, do you think, put lives at risk?
So in terms of costs, I think we're not there yet, because the argument has to be, first of all, one, that the benefits outweigh the harm. So how much this is actually going to cost becomes irrelevant until we actually are able to make that case. We must continue with raising awareness, and as Paul says, talking to his football teams, but it's really important now that government does one of two things. First of all, it changed the rules, it changed the guidelines and allows for doctors to have proactive conversations with men in high-risk groups. Exactly as Paul said, they don't turn men away. And secondly, we really keep driving awareness. So if men are in high-risk groups, so that's men over the age of 50, black men over the age of 45 and men with family history, they do get themselves forward, go and talk to the GP about having a PSA blood test.
Could more lives be saved if this decision had gone the other way?
I think until we get that evidence base, and that's what Transform will do, it will look at how do you save more lives and how do you reduce the harms. And once we've got that balance right, then we will definitely be able to save more lives in the future.
Well, there we have to leave it. But Laura Kirby, Paul Lythe, thank you so much for coming in and giving us that sort of snapshot reaction to that news that has now been officially confirmed. Thank you so much.